emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 384.LV1442, certificate number 35059. Drywall.
Yeah, I decided that I was tired of doing unsexy topics, and I was going to get down to the sexiest of them all.
Finally, we're going to pander and give the people what they want.
That's right.
Like when you're in your podcast player and you see a podcast come up, aren't you a little bit sad every time it's not about drywall?
Drywall is the topic.
When I say dry, you say wall. Dry.
Wall.
Dry.
Wall.
Dry.
Hot. Hot topic.
Hot wall.
Now, you restored, and by restored, I mean completely remodeled your home a few years ago. Did you venture into the construction site while it was being redone? You must have.
Yeah, we lived in the construction site
Oh, right.
while
You
it was
lived in
being
the
redone.
basement, didn't you?
Yeah, when they had to redo some stuff in the basement, so we all moved upstairs, and then they started on the main floor, and we all moved into the basement. It was fantastic.
And so drywall must have been your friend, right? There was drywall all around.
Love drywall, and I've put up drywall myself in college.
When did you do that? What were you building?
Friends' family was re-drywalling a garage, but like a huge 2-story Wyoming garage, just a cavernous space, like a barn in there. And putting up big pieces of drywall above head level it takes some doing.
It is. It's hard. You need a couple of ladders.
So he arranged to get some of his college roommates to come up, and I spent the weekend in Gillette, Wyoming, doing drywall. And just now I'm trying to figure out what it was in exchange for. I don't know what we got for the free drywall.
Were you just a holder upper, or did you have a screw gun at any point and actually put it in?
I did both. The only thing I really remember from the weekend is going to see the Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie in a Gillette, Wyoming theater that left the lights on throughout.
Wow, to keep people from their hands straying over into other people's popcorn.
Yeah, you don't want any fingering going on during when Tokyo's in danger.
Groping.
It really ruined my enjoyment of that fantastic movie.
I know, you were sitting amongst all your college buddies just hoping to have the wandering hands.
No, I just wanted to enjoy a classic of cinema, and Gillette wouldn't lower the lights.
Have you ever had your experience of your movie-going experience ruined by a too bright exit sign?
That's the worst.
I went to a theater one time, and the exit signs were so freaking bright, I couldn't ever get into the film.
I really do think maybe they should just say, you know what? We are okay with this number of people dying every year if the exit door under the screen is not lit.
Yeah.
It's going to kill a certain number of people. We've done the math. It's 28 and a half people every year. And that's just okay.
Or just show it right at the beginning, like keep the floor neat beneath your feet. There's the exit, and then turn it off.
Yeah, the nearest exit may be behind you. You don't know.
Exactly. I've also put up a lot of drywall in my day. I've built a couple of music studios.
So you were doing this for you. You weren't a hired hand.
That's right. It was like, we took over a garage, actually right across the street from Cal Anderson Park.
Yeah, I know that building.
Yeah, and put drywall up and insulation. We actually did the thing that you're supposed to do, which is build a wall inside of a wall in order to insulate the space for sound. And I've restored, my mom's house, when we were restoring it, we made maybe the big mistake of taking the lath and plaster down and putting drywall up in its stead. And the reason was that the plaster had kind of crumbled behind the wall. So if you hit the wall very hard, you would hear the crumbling. It would kind of crumble behind. And my mom felt like that was unsafe and weird, and she wanted it to be.
You don't want to hear your house crumbling,
right,
especially when you're in your 70s or 80s. You don't need to be reminded of entropy.
Yeah,
every second.
So just for the futurelings that have never lived in a house, the way that we constructed houses prior to the drywall era was that you would put up a kind of sub-wall out of rough boards, nailed up lengthwise, and then that would form a kind of screen over which a qualified plasterer would put a coat of plaster, spread it on with a trowel, and it would hang there on this wood matrix. And then the plaster would take a long time to harden. It took a while to dry.
What, like days?
Yeah. It would, building a house, like putting the plaster up was a skilled profession, and it would take a long time.
It's incredibly hard.
Very hard.
To take one of those little flat things and make a flat wall.
And a wall that, you're actually...
Trowel.
Trowel,
I just thought of the name.
One of those flat things.
Or the flat things.
But you're actually squooshing or splooging the plaster in between the lath, and then it kind of hangs on.
Because there's horizontal gaps in the lath?
Horizontal gaps, right. You put the lath together just far enough apart that you're not that you give it something to hang on, but close enough together that it's not just going to slide off. And then like cement, you have to, the mixture of plaster and water has to be just right so that it doesn't slough off, but also that it's not crumbly. Think about putting plaster up on a ceiling.
Yeah.
Just super hard work.
Is that nicer or fancy? Is lath and plaster nicer or fancier in any way beyond the fact that it shows that the house is old and labor-saving devices have not been invented yet?
You can decoratively trowel plaster, and you see that sometimes in later homes.
Oh, sure. I have a fresco in my bathroom.
But you can do that also over the top of drywall. One of the things that's nicer about it is that, when we took the lath and plaster out of my mom's house, we filled up a dumpster with it, and it was so heavy that it actually cracked the driveway. That plaster is heavy stuff.
So it makes your house sturdier?
Yeah, but also, as we'll see, it's rot resistant. And you might think that the wood behind it would be more liable to rot, but in fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's, although it is applied wet and takes a long time to dry, once it's on there, it's less susceptible to water. Because
drywall does bang up. A kid on a big wheel can do maybe more damage to a sheetrock wall than to an old plaster wall.
Yeah, right. A plaster, it is cement. And honestly, it's made out of the same stuff. It's made out of gypsum, which is a naturally occurring
That's what sheetrock and wall plaster is made out of?
Yeah, but gypsum is a crystal, and it's it's a naturally occurring sort of compound. What do you call it? A molecule, a crystal distillate.
It's a mineral.
It's a mineral. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
You thought it was an animal or a vegetable, maybe making up the wall, and I'm here to tell you it's not.
In fact, it's a mineral.
It's a mineral.
And one of the reasons we call plaster of Paris is that outside of Paris in Montmartre there was a big gypsum deposit, but people have been using gypsum as a building material for thousands of years. It was discovered that you could wet it and then do stuff with it, and when it dried, it was it solidified and became again a kind of it became kind of like a stone. It is alabaster. And so all ancient sculpture done in alabaster is just gypsum.
I was looking up the etymology of it to see if it was related to, because gypsy is often said to come from Egypt, like as a maybe controversial way to refer to
people from India.
Nomadic people. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's said to be related to Egypt. But in the case of gypsum, it's actually related from the Oh, it's the same
Greek.
It's the same Greek root as the Italian for where we get gesso, the stuff you use on a canvas before you paint, the white plaster you put on a canvas to paint on, which is also, I guess, full of gypsum.
Full of gypsum. It's also, I mean, it is what we think of as chalk. I mean, chalk that you would use on a blackboard.
Isn't chalk calcium carbonate?
Well, but
gypsum contains that.
Gypsum is, gypsum is calcium sulfate.
Okay.
But what we call blackboard chalk is actually gypsum. We're not like...
It's not the seashells from...
Right.
It's not limestone.
Easier to mine gypsum than it is to mine limestone. It's a crystal that, that naturally is, in its purest form, clear. But...
I want clear drywall in my house.
I know, wouldn't that be hot? But I mean, mostly it has impurities in it enough that you grind it up, and the gypsum that we use is actually ground into a fine powder. And is drywall that put into some kind of a goo? Like is something holding it all together, or is it just straight up plates of gypsum? So drywall was, I mean, lath-and-plaster is obviously like an expensive and time-consuming and, difficult material to work with. And so in 1888, the first kind of attempt to make this prefabricated wall was attempted in the UK, and it was basically wool felt, then covered with gypsum, wet gypsum, which then dried, and then another layer of felt. And these panels kind of were initially, it was meant to be a kind of fire break, because one thing that is true of lath and plaster is if the fire goes up the wall, your walls are made of wood, basically, and it can turn into an inferno. And so this was a form of wall that,
I wouldn't thought of felt as great fireproofing, but I guess it has enough mineral goop on it.
Yeah, that's right. As soon as it's impregnated with water and plaster, it doesn't like catch fire. But it didn't. It also didn't catch fire as a product.
Very nice.
Thank you. For a long time, in the late 19th century, in 1894, a man by the name of Augustine Sackett, now this is in the United States, refined gypsum board into what he called Sackett board. Yeah. Which was more, the gypsum was sandwiched between sheets of paper. And it was, the other thing is it enabled the panels to be much thinner than lath and plaster, and so lighter weight.
Yeah. You're wasting a ton of weight
goop.
On width. Yeah.
Right.
You're using more goop than you would have to make a wall.
Using too much goop was a major factor in the turn of the century. Fin de siècle. The world was like, too much goop.
It's the UTMG era.
How do we limit goop? But it still was considered cheapo by the construction people of the day. It wasn't, there wasn't this excitement about modernity in construction that you saw in the Art Deco era, in the later on as construction became its own style of expressing modernity. We weren't just building big Victorian homes anymore.
Yeah, I wonder if that's the thing. Most construction is for people who can say cost be damned. There's not some rising class of, there's no idea that, society's better if real estate's more affordable for working class people.
Right. Right. Until the social movements of the 20th century,
right,
which often were like housing movements. But in 1910, a company was formed called the U.S. Gypsum Corporation. They bought Sackett and became the first kind of gypsum conglomerate. And right at the end of World War I, they invented a product called sheetrock.
That's a trade name?
It's a trade name. It's like Xerox or Band-Aid.
And has it become genericized like Xerox and Band-Aid?
It has. So drywall is known by a lot of names. It's called drywall, which it's called that because it's not wet plaster. It's dry.
Fair enough.
It's called also plasterboard, which obviously. It's called wallboard.
I've heard wallboard.
It's called sheetrock. It's called gypsum board.
What happened to Sackett board?
Sackett board went away.
He was shot for the moon, but he didn't get immortalized.
It's also so I have referred to it as all those things, right? You go and you're like, oh, we need to get wallboard for this. Let's get some drywall. Let's get sheetrock. Like it's unlike Band-Aid or Xerox or Scotch tape. It really is I don't know why I would use one of those terms rather than the other.
Is there one that makes me sound like a more seasoned old guy at Home Depot?
Well, sheetrock, again, is the name of a product that's made by the U.S. Gypsum Corp. Still to this day. And I think within the construction trades, sheetrock as a brand is considered a better product. But drywall is what it is, and wallboard, those are off-brand. These are kind of what they are.
I'm only going to use a dumpster brand trash receptacle.
Right. But it's also weirdly, I mean, these are just some names that I heard in doing research, but no idea who calls it this. This all seems like something they might say in Mobile, but it's called Buster board and custard board.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing where you take the regional test to see where your accent is from, and that's when you find out that you're a weirdo that calls water fountains bubblers.
Yeah, let's get ourselves some Buster board and get this house built. But the Gypsum Corporation developed sheetrock, and again, it was still kind of, thought of as a little bit of a shabby way to build. The gypsum.
Are there downsides to it that make it less? I guess I just asked this, but are there any downsides?
Well, there is a kind of, the thicker your wall, the more, these aren't structural in the sense that they're not weight bearing or load bearing.
The structure's already there.
But it does kind of stiffen your structure, right? It feels.
Ooh, it does mine.
The advantages are that it's cheaper to build with. And I don't mean cheaper like...
Right.
It's just costs you a lot less
cost effective. So
zip this stuff up.
So it's universal today.
And I think originally, the technology gradually... Because you do put... And early on, sheetrock was sold as a thing that you would put plaster over. It actually... one of the incarnations of it had little ridges that were meant to hold plaster. But as the product developed... I think one of the major innovations was they started to kind of add porosity to the gypsum so that, they put air into the plaster mixture so that the boards were lighter and
easier to work with.
Now, of course, what that did, one of the properties of the kind of dry gypsum that is inside of wallboard, plus add the porosity in there, and it becomes water pregnable. And one of the downsides of drywall, and anyone who's ever had a leak in their roof will know this, it sucks up water.
Yeah.
It becomes kind of stained and unstable, and then also becomes a vector for mold. And mold can actually get inside the cavities, the porous, cavities of the drywall plaster, and become a source of this black mold that then kills you and creates terrible allergies. And probably most futurelings listening are actually black mold. And I apologize for the slur.
And this would be less likely to happen with lath-and-plaster because the plaster would be thick enough that the water would never actually get to the boards.
Yeah, something in the way that the plaster is very thick and once dry, much more difficult to saturate to the point that it liquefies. And drywall is a much drier, kind of sandier.
It's right there in the name.
Construction, right?
You still need some kind of goop with drywall, right?
In order to make the wall look seamless,
yes, you got to goop edges.
Yeah, you have to kind of add mud, what they call mud, which is
what is
evening.
Mud?
I would guess that mud is also gypsum.
You think it's just
wet gypsum?
It's just plaster. It's not actually mud of any kind.
What it turns out is that everything is made of gypsum, including you and me.
It's gypsum all the way down.
Now, gypsum is amazing for a few other reasons, and one is that it's an additive in fertilizer. Gypsum performs it's a way to remove saline from the soil. It imparts better flavor to growing vegetables.
Have we been bought out by Big Gypsum?
Well, this is the problem, and I'm referring to.
Is this entry brought to you by?
I'm referring to these products by name, and of course, I'm just selling it to you. Although we're going to see in a second, the gypsum industry is not without its controversy. There's a lot of gypsum in the world, and
is there enough?
Well, this is the thing, right? There's they estimate that there's 300 years worth of gypsum left that's kind of mineable.
Starting from now or starting from the beginning of the gypsum era in 1820 or whatever it was?
Maybe starting from now. Okay. Although it may not surprise you that China has a lot more gypsum than anywhere else. There are 132,000 metric tons. Now, how much is 1,000,000?
That's a million.
That's right. So 132 million metric tons of gypsum in China that's available, that's been discovered, I guess. And then, the Iran and Thailand are in the game. They're in the gypsum game. The United States only has 11,500,000 usable tons of gypsum available.
We have a gypsum gap, gentlemen.
There's a gypsum gap.
Well, I mean, China does have a lot more people to put in housing, so
they do, and I think probably drywall now is a major Chinese export. There's one advantage we have in gypsum, and that is...
Tell me so I can cling to it.
Well, this is it. It's the White Sands National Park in New Mexico.
Yes.
The White Sands Missile Range, and now White Sands...
The testing ground? Do we still test stuff there?
Yeah, I'm afraid we do. White Sands, what used to be a national monument, Herbert Hoover made it a national monument. And...
We love you, Herbert Hoover.
Here's a weird factoid. Maybe not weird, but it became a national monument because Albert Fall, a politician from New Mexico, owned a giant ranch and didn't want a bunch of gypsum miners coming around ruining his vistas. And so Albert Fall really lobbied throughout the 1920s to have this White Sands earmarked as a national monument. And then Albert Fall became the Secretary of the Interior. And
well, not a very good one, right? The story doesn't end there. He's like famously corrupt Secretary of the Interior who took the fall for Teapot Dome.
That's right. Albert Fall
he went to prison.
Had an inglorious history, but he did manage to get the White Sands National Monument declared an off-limits zone, although not off-limits to the Army, who tests their missiles all around the National Monument.
What a heroic early NIMBY. Thank you, Albert Fall.
Thank you. Sorry about Teapot Dome. That was kind of a bummer. White Sands was upgraded from a national monument to a national park by none other than Donald Trump as late as 2019.
I didn't know White Sands was a national park now.
It is. It just got over the line.
If I was one of those national park completists that has to go to every park, boy, would I be scurrying for southern New Mexico right now.
Yeah, you would be super bummed. White Sands has gypsum. It's made entirely of gypsum.
Is that why the sand is so white?
That's why the sand is so white.
Otherwise, it would just be called regular color sands.
It's gypsum that was... washed down during the glacial period or the end of the glacial period when that was all a giant lake. It was washed down out of the mineral deposits up in the mountains and then became, as the lake evaporated, this giant gypsum zone where the gypsum is 30 feet deep on the ground.
Wow.
And has wind-blown dunes up to 60 feet tall.
Of gypsum.
And the gypsum in White Sands equals 4.5 billion tons of gypsum. It is the largest gypsum repository anywhere in the world.
We are saying the word gypsum an awful lot.
It's a good word, though.
Gypsum.
But it's now off limits to the construction industry because it's a national park.
Oh.
So we have...
That seems like that would not That would not have troubled Trump's Interior Department.
No, not at all. But it's right. They love to stand in the way of commerce and industry in order to protect the environment. One of the reasons is that there's an incredible diversity of species living in what would seem to be a
Very inhospitable
place devoid of life.
Inorganic gypsum sand. Who lives there?
Both flora and fauna. The bleached earless lizard lives there.
Where else would they go?
Right. They're bleached for obvious reasons to protect them from hawk.
You got to blend in with the white sands.
It's not clear why they're earless, although scientists...
Well, hold on. It's an earless lizard.
Yeah.
Aren't all lizards earless?
No, I think lizards...
When's the last time you saw a lizard walking around with big earlobes?
Well, just because don't be so normative. You can have ears and not have them be big.
Oh,
ears.
they don't even have holes in their heads?
These lizards have no ears, no ear structure, and yet...
Well, the great thing is we can just talk all the crap about them we want.
That's right.
They won't know.
Well, they're not listening to this podcast, nor are their descendants. But the scientists that got bored trying to tell if your plants were sad have tested the earless lizard, and they can hear maybe through their feet. Lizards got feet.
They've got a workaround. They're like Daredevil. Their other sentences have been heightened.
Yes. There are 45 different species that are endemic to the White Sands Park, meaning that they only exist there, not anywhere else. 40 of those are moths. So it depends on how you feel about moths.
This does seem like it's ripe for some kind of spotted owl backlash from the gypsum industry. Who's going to say, what? You're going to put America's mom and pop gypsum out of work for 40 species of moth?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, too.
Doesn't that have good animals?
Well, it does. It has big fauna.
It has big feet.
But if that's just like fauna prejudice. If you think big fauna are better than little fauna.
Really? If you're going to go to a zoo, what are you going to see first? The moose and the polar bear?
Right.
Or the chinchilla and the earless lizard?
The thing is, you can put an earless lizard in a terrarium in your house. Can you do that with a polar bear?
Yes, but it would have to be a really big, the sides would be made of transparent gypsum drywall.
Right. It would be a Jeff Bezos thing.
Meet George Gypsum.
But at some point they've been trying to drill in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge for basically my whole life.
They're doing a terrible job.
Yeah,
maybe they need to switch drill bits or something.
The environmentalists are very strong. It's in Alaska, but there will come a day 300 years from now where the building industry is like, we're out of gypsum. We're having to buy it from the Chinese.
White Sands is the new Anwar.
Yeah, exactly. But gypsum became, or rather wallboard, and specifically sheetrock, became a major industry immediately after World War II, and you can imagine why, which is that there was a baby boom and all these returning veterans and a huge housing boom. From 1946 to 1960, 21 million homes were built in the United States to contain all these moms and pops, all the ward cleavers,
the little new GI Bill families.
Right. The American outer ring of every city is full of these little mid-century modest homes,
Levittowns,
all made of wallboard, because you're throwing these houses up, and you need to have an efficient and clean, like industrial product to get this work done.
I mean, think how fast all those houses went up.
Yeah.
No lath-and-plaster guy is going to be able to do that.
And I think, probably at some point the electric drill made it even faster. I've never put up wallboard with nails.
Can you imagine doing it with nails?
Ugh. Wow. I mean, I've taken wallboard down that was nailed up, and it's amazing to think that these effectively carpenters were hammering this stuff up with these wide head nails. Now we zip it in with wallboard zippers.
Zip.
But, originally advertised as fireproof, now they were just a kind of ubiquitous building material. One also downside is that termites actually like to eat, not the gypsum.
They can't eat the gypsum. It's not organic.
Although it is edible. Gypsum is also used as a gypsum is used as a kind of it's used as a coagulant in food. Like the reason that tofu isn't just a liquidy mush.
Thank you, gypsum.
Is that they add gypsum to it and it solidifies. So the firmer your tofu, the more wallboard you're eating.
without tofu, gypsum, bean curd is just bean. It wouldn't even curd.
There it is. So gypsum became or rather wallboard and sheetrock became an incredibly widespread material. Anytime you drive on the United States interstate, you're going to see big semis go by laden with drywall
or tofu,
desperately trying to outrun the rain, presumably. Termites eat the paper. They love the paper and glue, I guess. And so termites can do damage to your wallboarded home by eating the paper away,
off of it.
And then the the internal gypsum crumbles and falls out. I mean, what an indignity.
Just make the paper some flavor they don't like, pistachio or cantaloupe or whatever it is termites don't like.
My experience is that termites love cantaloupe and pistachio. They're
those are the worst things I could have picked.
They're not picky eaters at all. So your typical wallboard in the United States and European wallboard and American wallboard have different dimensions and are different, not different products, but different mentalities in construction. I guess American houses have big expanses of wall, and so our panels are bigger.
You just want to walk into your McMansion and see that big, showy 2-story entry.
Everything in America is bigger, god darn it.
Too big.
Gosh darn it.
If you ask me.
But our, the most common drywall in the United States is a 1/2 inch thick and the panels weigh about 50 pounds. And so although you imagine that builders make walls that are dimensions that would receive an
wallboard
even
friendly
panel.
Yeah.
In fact, wallboard waste is one of the major sort of waste elements of the construction industry.
Like the edges of the gingerbread after the cookies cut?
Exactly. In order to wallboard a room, you're often cutting off a portion of every panel, sometimes the top, sometimes the sides. You're trying to any place you've got a window, right? You've got to put a portion of wallboard there. And so
what happens to the spare ends?
Well, up to 17% of all construction waste is wallboard garbage, which goes in dumpsters.
But we're running out.
Well, yeah, and it then ends up in landfills. But wallboard that sits in a landfill and gets rained on and combines with other garbage produces hydrogen sulfide. So it's one of the many ugly off gases of a landfill is this decaying wallboard. So there's now part of the eco-construction innovations. There's a recognition, at least among progressive builders, that this gypsum is recyclable, and that the demolition aspect of it or the waste aspect should sequester the wallboard ends separately from all the other garbage, and then send those off. But I mean, this is incurring extra expense at every level.
But you could send it off to somebody just trying to build a little house.
Yeah, right, like a tree house.
Oh, yeah, or a dollhouse.
Each level of construction,
Right.
should, hey, here's the little ends of 2x4s.
Now that's a birdhouse. It gets down to model railroad
little
buildings.
Mouse house.
I mean, because you couldn't just grind it up. It's got paper on it now, right? So
It does, but
you'd have to filter it out.
It is recyclable, right? You can the gypsum companies increasingly are making wallboard from old walls.
Yeah.
And so that is part of the industry. But it should be noted that the wallboard industry is extremely competitive So much so that there used to be big deposits of, or I think still are, big deposits of gypsum in Nova Scotia, and there were like black market gypsum exchanges happening between the United States and Nova Scotia because they were evading taxes and evading.
Oh, between U.S. businesses, they were illegally getting Nova Scotian gypsum.
That turned into enough of a conflict that it was described as and this is in the 1920s, it was described as the plaster wars, or a plaster war. It's still kind of, it's like in the Nova Scotia tourist. Anytime you go to Nova Scotia and read a pamphlet, they're definitely going to refer to the plaster wars, kind of like San Juan Island does with the pig war.
If I ever meet the members of Sloan, I'm going to ask them what they think about that.
Yeah, tell me about this. But there's a lot of controversy even now within the wallboard industrial community. We use so much wallboard in the United States that even though the United States Gypsum Corporation is the maker of sheetrock and still the big player, there are a lot of other players. And just recently, there was a major price fixing scandal among all of the different wallboard makers.
They're an evil cartel. I love it.
They are. And in 2018, the wallboard makers were collectively sued for price fixing. And without, they kind of Alford plead out of it without acknowledging any actual guilt. They paid $191 million into a fund, which, of course, obviously they're not guilty because non-guilty parties would pay $200 million into a fund every day.
I have a house with drywall. I feel like I should be part of this class action suit.
Yeah, and I wonder who in fact did benefit from it. But the following companies: Eagle Materials, American Gypsum.
Now you're calling them out.
New National Gypsum.
We just don't care anymore.
Pabco.
Yeah, we're taking down Pabco.
Also, Georgia Pacific got into the game, and a subsidiary of U.S. Gypsum. They all kind of were collectively sued and paid into this big fund.
It's like the big tobacco lawsuit.
Yeah.
Except nobody got sick. They just paid too much for their contractor.
But in researching the scandalous price fixing and antitrust, because Georgia Pacific didn't just price fix, they actually bought up a bunch of small wallboard companies and tried to corner some aspect of the market. They're not troubling U.S. Gypsum, the big multi-billion-dollar company.
900-pound gorilla.
Which also, incidentally, a portion of U.S. Gypsum is owned by Berkshire Hathaway because somehow
he knows what's up.
He goes out and gets every little corner of do you make railroad lanterns? Well, that seems like a brick and mortar business we're going to invest in. He's not making apps, in other words. Right.
Because apps can go away, but we're always going to need drywall and railroad lanterns.
But it turns out there were multiple, the gypsum wallboard industry has been the source of multiple price fixing and antitrust actions over the decades. In the 1920s, in the 1940s, and in the 1970s, the wallboard makers all had to be brought to account for their illicit deals.
I assume it's because when you make a really boring commodity, you're aware of that, and you wish you were in something more glamorous. All the drywall millionaires wish they were uranium millionaires.
Right. They're fixing the onion futures.
Exactly.
It never happens. It never happens in the making something cool
sports cars.
I guess it does happen in the cocaine industry.
You think there's abuses in the cocaine industry?
I think that if we had the ability to level antitrust litigation against the cocaine producers, I think there'd be some violations.
All these big gypsum guys just want the glamorous life that they see on Narcos. And as a result, they cut corners.
Well, literally.
And that concludes Drywall, entry 384.LV1442, certificate number 35059 in the Omnibus. Futurelings, you can find the Omnibus on social media at Omnibus Project, should that tickle your fancy for whatever reason. I'm at Ken Jennings. John, you can find via his Patreon. We have a Patreon as well for the show. If you feel like your other entertainment options are not giving you enough drywall-based content.
Our Patreon is super duper cool.
Our show is often dry, but rarely about walls.
Yeah. The termites do not like the edges of our show.
Our show has been termite-free for 354 shows. That's our motto. We do not want to reset that sign. So please, if you enjoy Omnibus, consider contributing at patreon.com/omnibusproject. You can email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can send us physical artifacts at P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. For example, Mike, who is constantly troubling us on our Patreon addenda shows. We do a weekly bonus show for Patreon, or a monthly bonus show for Patreon donors. And Mike is our number one corrector. He has sent us a buzzer, a USB buzzer, which I've just plugged in and maybe is installing malware on my laptop. I don't know.
Dear. Oh, dear.
What do you think this is going to do when I press it?
It looks like the buzzer from Sorry, the old board game.
Yeah, or Taboo or something.
Is it going to go womp, womp?
I assume it's just going to buzz. Let's see what this is for.
What did it do?
It didn't do anything. Oh, here it is. I shouldn't have used the USB at all. Here we go. This is Mike again.
Mike, for a third time. Come on.
Should we change the name of the addenda show?
To answer Mike's questions or to take Mike's comments?
Mike Denda? It's always good to have a buzzer that has a long snippet of dialogue.
Why would we ever have occasion to use that buzzer? Did we say something like that at the end of that show?
Well, let me tell you, John.
Yes.
Well done. Thank you, Mike, for that addenda.
See how this comes up all the time?
Yeah.
You should just take this to parties.
Mike.
And if somebody named Mike tells you something that's a bit of an addition to something that somebody's already said,
let's just say, well done.
You could just press that button.
Again. Mike, for a third time. Come on. Should we change the name of the addenda show?
It's confusing because both of us would have to be there.
Yeah.
To take Mike's comments? Mike Denda?
Mike, thank you for sending us that. As soon as we're done here, Ken is going to try and figure out how to reprogram that to say something that we might say.
It turns out that you can get anything you want on this show if you just send it to us in buzzer form.
Yeah,
we can't resist a big shiny red button.
We enjoyed it, though.
Thank you, Mike. We could also just say those things. We don't need a buzzer that does our voices. We can do good impressions of us.
You do an impression of me.
You do an impression of me.
Wow.
Isn't that uncanny?
I sound kind of dumb.
Dur, dur, dur.
You do an impression of me.
I haven't been on Jeopardy. And then Soren, an Iranian-American listener, thanked us.
Does he specify that?
Thanked us for, sent us some
Soren isn't really an Iranian name.
2 O's.
Oh, 2 O's. Soren.
Sent us some money with the Ayatollah on it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love that.
But also each of us got some kind of a tile. Related to Aya Nasir, the famous, historically terrible purveyor of copper.
Oh, look at that. Fine quality copper. It's his logo.
He's got new stuff for trade shows.
That's weird that that it was written in English.
Thank you, Soren.
Show me the Ayatollah dollars. That's what they're called, Ayatollah dollars.
They were in this letter, and
you lost the Ayatollah dollars.
Oh no!
Unbelievable. Come on, Ken.
I'm not just the great Satan, but I'm.
Time's the waste in here.
Here it is. I found it.
Oh.
He's just looking at you like, he's kind of looking sideways like, you are the great Satan, aren't you?
He is, yeah. He wants to avert his gaze. He doesn't want to see me.
He's afraid he might see a woman, perhaps. Thank you so much, Soren, for the copper merch and the post-revolution Iranian money. You can find your fellow Futurelings at the Futurelings groups on Facebook and Discord and whatnot. And what did I not say? That might have been it.
I feel like you got everything.
I was
right?
so.
Oh no, you didn't say did you say the address?
The mailing address?
Yeah.
I think I did. P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We try every episode to
end the world.
To record an episode that is under an hour long. Ken says every time, I want to do a 45-minute episode. And every time we do an hour and 8-minute long episode.
No matter what.
Now, I don't know why we end a lot of these episodes going, that had to have been a short one. And I was like, nope, an hour 3. But today, we're coming in right at 45, and that's so exciting to us. Now, you may feel
It's because I have to go to the doctor.
Yeah, you may feel, now that I just used gypped in the wrong way.
Don't say that.
You may feel like you've got
cheated.
Not gotten your $3 worth, not gotten your Iranian rials worth, but we're very proud because Ken has to go to the doctor. Anyway, we hope and pray that the catastrophe of short omnibus episodes may never again come. But actually, we want to make it more 45 minutes. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.